every member can hear every other member. I will get us started. My name is Scott Stroh. I am joining the meeting from Mason Neck, Virginia. Do we have Julie with us today? I believe she said she was going to be absent. Gretchen?
Hi, Gretchen Bulova calling in from Fairfax, Braddock District.
Hi, Gretchen.
Hey.
Patrick?
Patrick Lennon, Fairfax, Virginia, with Visit Fairfax.
Thank you, Patrick. Ken Saunders?
I don't think Ken is going to be part of the meeting.
Oh, that's right. He's going. George? I know George is here. George?
Yeah, hi, it's George Albert. I'm calling in from Centerville, Virginia in Sully District.
Great. Thank you, George. Cameron?
Hi, Cameron Brummett, calling in from Springfield, Virginia.
Denise?
Denise Dressel calling in from Haymarket, Virginia.
Mary?
Mary Lipsey from Springfield.
Thank you, Mary. Is Liz with us?
Hi, this is Liz Maurer. I'm representing the National Museum of the United States Army, but I am calling in from Bellevue, Virginia.
Very good. I know Laura was not able to be with us today. And I know we have Supervisor Stork with us today.
You do. I'm calling from Mount Vernon District Office in right here in beautiful Fort Hunt, Gum Springs area.
Excellent. Thank you, Supervisor. Is there anybody else on the call? I can't see everybody. So am I missing anybody, Denise?
Pamela Spear? I think you're muted. Yeah, we're not hearing you. I'm sorry. Nope. You're sorry. No, we're not hearing you. I can tell you were unmuting and muting your microphone. You're unmuted now, but
I can hear because I'm next door to her, but otherwise I don't hear you through the computer.
Is it okay to acknowledge that we see? Oh.
yes. Yes.
I had no idea what that was, but I'm in the Mount Vernon office as well.
We hear you now.
Excellent. Thank you. So it seems as though everybody can hear everybody. So I will move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of the board. Can we get a second on that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Awesome. Second, having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures, the fact that we're meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for public access to this meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for this board to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting, and that as such FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of this board and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that this board may conduct this meeting electronically through a dedicated telephone line, and that the public may access this meeting by calling 1-415-655-0001. It is so moved. Finally, it is next required that all of the matters addressed on today's agenda must address the state of emergency itself, are necessary for continuity of Fairfax County government, and or are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and the discharge of the board's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved. Denise, did I miss anything?
Second and unanimously accepted, correct? Yes.
Correct. Awesome. So now we're very, very honored and pleased to have Supervisor Stork with us today. Supervisor, we continue to be so appreciative of your leadership and putting the board matter forward to establish this group and give us the chance to begin thinking about the 250th, and would welcome any comments or remarks from you at this time, sir. Thank you.
I truly don't have much other than I'm as excited, maybe even more excited than some of you are, because not only my love of history, as I think most of you know, my own characterization of that history, at least over the previous 25 years, but more importantly, because we have an amazing opportunity to do it, if you will, right, in Fairfax County, which means you need to get ahead of it and you need to have thought about it. And I think being thoughtful and focused is a key part of what you all are doing right now, which is trying to take something that maybe is this wide and try to figure out which part of this really works well or is important for what we should be focusing our time on. I'm sure we'll miss a few things, but more importantly, we cast the net wide to begin with, and we then share how wide the net was cast, and then you come back with, as part of your work, and come back and say, hey, here are the things that we think are the most important to focus on. And I'm going to take Scott's lead on this, and maybe many others. I don't know, but Scott, from the very beginning, when he came to our tourism task force meeting, made it clear that this isn't just about celebrating the 250th anniversary. This is really about celebrating the process for getting to our 250th anniversary. And Semiquincentennial is a big deal in that we made it this far, but the fact that we made it this far isn't a function of a year, it's a function of 250 plus years, and a lot of struggle, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of mistakes, hopefully some learned lessons along the way that will serve us well. So I'm very much focused and share that Scott's guidance. And I know I think at the state level, it's similar guidance to make this truly an inclusive and a diverse and a opportunity to highlight how we've gotten here, as well as the fact that we've gotten here, and who and what are key parts of that, of course. So I'm here to provide whatever resource. I know that you may or may not need other people or supports, and I know that I'm happy to shepherd those back to the board if the board needs to weigh in on them. I'm confident that the board would be very supportive. I think the most important thing, and I would say this, the most important thing is that you believe you've been thorough, and you believe that you've been comprehensive and careful, and you've cast your net wide, and you come back with things that you think seem appropriate. And if it takes you a little bit longer to do that, I think that's far less consequential than the fact that it's being done. And if there's individuals or issues that maybe aren't effectively represented by you all, that you'll take the time to reach out to other groups and other individuals and gather in their thoughts and ultimately look for ways to include them in all that we do. Because in the end, I was holding up earlier, this is a Richmond Highway study that was done, Richmond Highway market study, and in our work, we have 1 million of these studies, right? And those we always, for HODs and other things, we always got 1 million of these studies, but the study is important, but frankly, it's not even particularly valuable if it can't be activated, it can't be operationalized. And I am not the person that wants to just bring in consultants and come up with great ideas. I really believe that we need to find a way to activate and actualize them. And if that means saying some tough things that maybe others don't want to hear, then I think that's your role. I think that's maybe the most critical role you have, is identifying here's the range of options that we have, from kind of the most basic levels to maybe the most idealized level. And I think sharing that and at least framing it out for us. I don't think anybody has any expectation that you're going to know 1, 2, 3, 4, but you hopefully will at least put the frame together that identifies what could be hung, in these different parts of the picture and the picture itself, I think is really your most crucial role. And just do your best to get it right. And I'm sure it won't be perfect, but it'll be far more than what we knew 6 months ago when we started this basic process. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate that very much. And again, thank you for joining us today and for your leadership and support. It means a great deal, and we're looking forward not only to our next steps, but to all that's going to transpire inclusively and collectively over the next 5 years, I guess. So thank you. With
Let
that,
me know if I could be of any help, and I will be on here a few more minutes, and then I have to get off for another call, but please let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions too, but please let me know how I can be of support and helping to realize what I think we all are excited about, 250 years and how we got here. So thank you.
wonderful. Are there questions for the supervisor at this point from anybody on the group before he has to depart? Well, hearing none, I will again extend our thanks, and we certainly understand that you have other things to get to. And we will jump into our agenda. The three primary things on our agenda today, I want to take a little bit of time and talk about a study that we have referenced in several of our prior meetings that was commissioned at the Commonwealth level about some perceptions and some public perspective on the 250th. We will also talk a little bit about the question that came up at the last meeting in terms of, are there others who we would like to invite to join us? I've received emails from several of you with some suggestions, but just want to make sure we're being comprehensive in considering and compiling names of others. And then I think one of the real takeaways from the wonderful presentation we had last week or last month from Gretchen and Patrick was the importance of defining a clear and effective and efficient subcommittee structure. So I want to make sure we have some time to talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, we'll reserve some time for any open forum or Q&A or public comment at the end, Denise, if there is anybody from the public that has joined us. But in thinking about what we have achieved up to this point, just by way of very brief review, as you know, we spent the bulk of our meeting in January looking at and understanding and learning what the Commonwealth Commission was doing, how it was structured, what some of the themes and some of the activities and some of the goals and objectives that the Commonwealth Commission had identified. As I mentioned, we had that really important and insightful presentation last time about other commemoration activities in the county, which I know I learned a heck of a lot from, and I hope you've had a chance to go back and look at that presentation again, which was kindly provided to us, so we have it as an ongoing reference. And what I wanted to talk a little bit about today was a larger research study, which I will provide a little bit more of an introduction for in just a minute. But before I do, I think as we continue down the road of fulfilling our charge that the county has set forth for us, there will continue to be important times for us to reflect and learn and to draw inspiration and insight from other sources of information, whether it's in the Commonwealth or other research or other content that is being produced more broadly, either at the national level or in other states. I do think, however, and just wanted to put forth for your consideration, that I am certainly envisioning that the balance of our work going forward after today will be more specifically guided by the need to produce the report. I think the research and the learning and the knowledge and the discussion that we've been having and will have today, I think has been incredibly important. And as I said, will continue. But I do envision after today framing our interactions, both in terms of our monthly meetings, but perhaps some more frequent meetings of various subcommittees to really be focused on answering the questions and fulfilling the charge set forth for us to come up with sort of a broad framework and some preliminary concepts for what we are proposing that the county consider and pursue associated with this larger commemoration. So just wanted to put that out there initially. I welcome any questions or comments about that strategy, but that's kind of what I've been reflecting on over the past few weeks. And I think after today, we'll be in an even stronger position to move forward in that regard. But I did want to just put that out there for any question or comment at this point. Does that general approach and strategy sound good to everybody?
I think that sounds great. Could you just remind me when we have to have a report to the board?
We are supposed to submit something by the end of June.
Okay.
There's nothing specifically referenced in the board matter concerning length or organization. And as the supervisor just alluded to, you know, I guess it's possible we could get an extension. But at this point, I think the goal is to have something to present to the supervisors by the end of June.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense.
All right. Any other questions or comment? All right, so I'm going to try to share my screen here. There we go. Can everybody see that? All right, so Gretchen will be familiar with this. And by way of introduction, in 2020, in preparation for the formal establishment of the Commonwealth Commission, there was a commission studied in collaboration with the Virginia Tourism Corporation that was funded by the Virginia Tourism Corporation and was implemented by Wilkening Consulting, who some of you in the museum world are probably very familiar with Wilkening Consulting, but Susie Wilkening and her company do a significant amount of really broad, comprehensive analysis of audience and visitation and travel and tourism trends specific to history and culture. And this is a study that was commissioned to get a sense of how the public was beginning to think about, perceive, and connect with the possibility of a commemoration or a celebration in 2026 around the 250th. And I will be perfectly honest with you that this analysis and the full report was about 300 pages in length. I share that. One, you're not going to get all 300 pages today, I assure you. It's a sunny day, it's a Friday. I'm not going to keep you past the appointed time. But I share that just by way of saying that what you will hear a little bit about today is in many ways just a very, very brief overview and microcosm of a much larger and more comprehensive report that goes into much more than even just 2026 and the 250th. What we're going to focus on today and the time that we have is really digging a bit more deeply into some of the larger overarching themes and specifically some of what this analysis and this research revealed specific to the 250th. I am happy to send any of you who would like to review the larger report, the full 300 pages. It's actually quite interesting. But you're just going to get a bit of an overview of all that today. And then we'll have a little bit of time for some Q&A before we move into the other items on our agenda. So we will proceed, see if I can. So as you see here, the initial question that framed this analysis, as you see here, was, will Americans want to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the signing? And if so, how? And a significant part of Susie's report goes into all the methodology, which we're going to skip over. But as I said, it is substantial. But there were a couple of preliminary perspectives and points that became very clear that Susie just put forth at the very beginning. One, our values, attitudes, and beliefs affect how we approach the past. That overall, the good news is history is highly valued, but there does appear to be a lack of inclusion, and that's a barrier to engagement. And that the vast majority hold strong values about our country that they honor and respect, and all with their own unique perspectives will want to acknowledge in 2026. So one of the real interesting things about this study was they really broke out they broke out some demographic analysis into two core groups of people, one of which they're defining as traditionals, and traditionals are more likely to have the traits you see here. They're not as inclusively motivated, much more comfortable with the status quo. They tend to be politically and socially conservative. And I should say none of these are critiques. This is just analysis based on 9 months of research and analysis. Traditionals tend to be somewhat less engaged with history, less engaged with the broader world and the community. They tend to be more mature, more male, and less educated, somewhat less curious. And I will note that one of the really interesting things about Susie's analysis, and is a thread through all of her different research projects, is this real interesting notion of curiosity, which we can talk more about, and how curiosity in many ways is a window and a portal, if you will, to engagement. So there's been a lot of discussion at the Commonwealth Commission level, but in other areas, about how we can motivate curiosity as part of the commemoration as a way to drive interest and engagement. Traditionals also to be more enamored with a celebratory approach to history. And they intend to be more of what Susie refers to in this study as a blind patriot. So those are your traditionals. And when we think about this, it's important to note that all of this analysis, again, this comprehensive analysis, sort of, there are nuances and variations, but her findings revealed that pretty universally people fall into one of these two categories. So the next category is what you see here is NEOTERIC. And honestly, I have to admit, that's a word I was not familiar with before I started to work with Susie and learn this study. And the NEOTERIC folks tend to be more inclusive. They're more politically and socially liberal, somewhat more engaged with history, generally more engagement with the community and broader world. Again, tend to be younger, more female, more highly educated, more curious. And they have more of an additive approach to history. And what the report identifies as more symbolically patriotic, which means they are have great pride in our country, but also recognize in ways that perhaps the traditional demographic does not, that our country is not necessarily exceptional or the best, and that we have our own flaws and challenges as well. So we're just moving pretty quickly here. So then, again, she references that traditionals tend to be more in the blind patriotism category, NEOTERICs in the more symbolic patriotism. And then there was folks that she found that identified as having no patriotic identity. You can see here some of what I just alluded to, but the blind patriotism is really defined by this notion that the United States is unquestionably the best country on earth. As you see here with the symbolic, yes, we're a great country, but so are others, and we also have some flaws. And then obviously, to a lesser extent, some that don't really have patriotism as part of their identity. And as you note here, an interesting concept of feeling perhaps betrayed by their country and feeling that other countries are better. So let me keep going here. So in terms of history museum goers, which obviously the commemoration will focus much more broadly on those that are just history museum goers, but this is an important subset. And there were two elements to this study, one that focused just on history museum goers, and one also done in partnership with the Pew Foundation on a much broader and more general audience. And again, you can see here some of how these notions of patriotism break out in terms of perceptions about the United States in relation to other countries, sort of this notion of the United States being one of a number of gay countries, but not perhaps the greatest. And then again, down at the bottom, this sense that we're those that don't really have that patriotic identity, that there are other countries that are better. And you can see here where some of this breaks out in terms of history museum goers, which clearly in the top two categories are scoring a little bit higher. So this one I think is particularly interesting when you look at what we are envisioning for this commemoration, both at the Commonwealth level, but also, as the supervisor said, what we're thinking about here at the county level. And you can see here which of America's founding ideals are the most important. And again, the maroonish color are museum goers, the gray color is the broader population. And what I think is really interesting is that you see at the very top, freedom, liberty, opportunity, equality, and down at the bottom, you see things like the American dream, but you also see down towards the bottom some notions of tolerance and diversity and truth, which I also think is interesting. So here you get a sense, and I think this is important as we think and consider how we want to frame the commemoration in Fairfax County about what people are telling us is most important to them. And I think this one reinforces some of what we're thinking, but if you look at it on the flip side, also demonstrates that in each of these categories, there's still a pretty significant percentage of the population, particularly the broader population, that is not as interested, certainly not as interested as museum goers are. So I think what this also reflects is the important awareness of crafting our work in a way that also creates opportunities for those who aren't identifying these ideals as being important, because we want this to be something that is broad and inclusive and comprehensive, and which everybody feels a part of. So I thought that this slide was also particularly interesting. When you think back to that traditional demographic, here are some of the values that rose to the top as Susie did this analysis. And I will also say that in that 300-page report, about a third of it are direct quotes, anonymous quotes, but direct quotes from people who were interviewed. And the quotes really provide a more personal perspective on this data, but we just don't have time to go through all those quotes today. So here you see the traditional cluster values: liberty, courage, American dream, exceptionalism, opportunity. And then when you look at the NEOTERIC clusters, what you see here is, again, equality, diversity, tolerance. And you do see a couple of quotes here embedded in, which also I think are interesting. So when you think about these concepts of American identity and how we're defining individuals from a demographic perspective, as I said, you have this traditional cluster. They prefer an America that aligns much more with their traditional values. Most desire what they perceive as a benign status quo. There's this really important notion of celebrating history, and in particular celebrating white history, and being sort of being in a position of deliberately avoiding or not being open to other inclusive, more inclusive stories. And ironically, these folks are less likely to, maybe it's not ironic, but these folks are less likely to visit history museums. If you look on the other side, not surprisingly, given what we've just gone through, prefer an America that promotes equality and diversity, really desire a more inclusive and tolerant society, and much more likely to visit history museums either casually or regularly. So then when you get into some of the specific findings about 2026, the consensus is that everyone wants what is best for our families, communities, and country. And many wished for a less polarized and divisive public discourse, but there were clearly very strong differences and opinions about what that means. And as you can see, some point to the past as the ideal that we want to go back to, and others are pointing to a more equitable society that they hope we can find in the future. So what this breaks out when we're thinking back to sort of the traditional in relation and comparison to the NEOTERIC, what folks in the traditional demographic are looking for in 2026 is a focus on greatness, pride, maintaining rights and liberties, honoring the past. And for some, there's a strong religious component. And here you can see a quote from one of the survey responders that reinforces that. What I find interesting in this quote is that religious component, acknowledging God as the divine inspiration for our founding documents, and this sense of return to a moral society. On the NEOTERIC side of the slide here, again, focus on inclusion, diversity, equity, with a number also commenting on climate change and fair elections. And here you see the quote that is really about universal care and acceptance, appreciation of diversity, and the beneficial effects of diversity on our society. So you begin to see that as we think about 2026, there are clearly some differences of hopes and aspirations in these two audience demographics. And I think what I would say at this point is the methodology was such that that the research and the interviews and the analysis was not bound or limited in terms of geography. So the way this was implemented is there was enough geographic representation that while while we may think in Virginia, for instance, that we're in a particularly diverse part of the Commonwealth that may skew more one way or another, these universal findings, that is leveled out because the geography there weren't limits on the geography as part of the study. So I do think that while there may be some local variations in the percentages on either side, that these trends are real in every community. So here's the next question that she considered was, if we're envisioning such different Americas, how can we come together? So you get in specifically to what we're thinking about regarding the 250th. And there's an interesting question here that, asking folks, will you do anything to celebrate the 250th? And I think what's interesting here is that less than 50% of museum goers and less than 50% of the broader population said yes. And you see, probably does not even exceed 50%, or probably does not even exceed 50%. And then you also see in the broader population approaching 20% that see no reason to celebrate the 250th, which in no way is meant to imply that there is not an incredibly important, meaningful, and distinctive opportunity with the 250th. I think this insight and this data is really important because it gives us some sense of what we need to do over the next 5 years and where we need to focus our efforts to ensure that what we do in the 250th does have maximum impact and value for the largest number of people. And here you see some differences in terms of this enthusiasm quotient. And again, we've talked a little bit in the context of what the Commonwealth Commission was envisioning. And I think at one point over the course of that conversation, I made the comment, or the comment was shared, that we were thinking about 2026 very differently from how 1976 was envisioned. And again, that's not a criticism. That's just, we're in a different time. We're looking for the 2026 to be something that is different. But again, you see the traditionals thinking much more perhaps of what they remembered from 1976 with a big party, lots of celebrations. And on the other side, you see the NEOTERICs wanting to entertain different options. Then let's see here. I thought this is an interesting conversation and certainly relevant to some of our next steps is, what sort of terminology is most appropriate, and what sort of and what these different terms mean to different audiences about what the 2026 and the 250th will be, can be, and should be. And you see here some of how it breaks out in terms of the distinction between celebration and commemoration and anniversary and birthday a little further down. But here's where some of the analysis gets particularly interesting, because as you see here, at first glance, it looks like celebration is the right word, but very much skewed towards that traditional cluster, which probably at this point is not surprising. And here you see some of how this other analysis is so important, particularly when we think about messaging and terminology, in the sense that of those who do not feel that celebration is the right term, there were very strong feelings about how the term celebration is tone deaf or worse in relationship to some of the larger social justice and other social challenges that are facing all of us in our country at the present time. So what this study and what this research project suggests is that commemoration is recommended for broader public engagement. And then as we get closer to the end here, you see of those who said they would acknowledge the 250th, here you see some of the things they said they would do or how they would acknowledge it. And overwhelmingly, you see probably in the 70 to 75% range, visiting history museums and historic sites, programs, exhibits, festivals that celebrate diversity, programs and exhibits focusing on the founding fathers, community festivities. And then as you work your way a little bit further down, you see reenactments, probably a little bit less than 50%. And when I was growing up as a kid in Philadelphia in 1976, I think I remember the reenactments more than anything else that happened. But obviously, we're looking at this from a little bit of a different perspective now. And then just as we get towards a bit of an overview, in terms of the traditional clusters, much more enthusiasm, much more of a celebratory approach about developing pride, honoring founding fathers, incorporating this sense of sacrifice, and also this sense that they really are hopeful that the 250th will create the sense of unity that they feel is presently lacking. And then on the NEOTERIC side, a more thoughtful, inclusive approach that's much broader than just the founding fathers, that acknowledges, embraces differences and diversity, and that recognizes that this is very much a work in progress, and that there is not only much work that occurred after 1776, but much more work that continues to be needed. And then again, just in terms of some takeaways, here you see again, traditional cluster excited and enthusiastic. The research shows that as long as some of the program engages them, they'll likely participate and be satisfied given that level of enthusiasm and excitement. This means positive celebratory things that focus on things that do unite us, potentially have value. But that there are still many in this other cluster that really want to see something that's much more inclusive, that has more meaningful content than just the parties and the fireworks, and that is also more of an assessment on how we're doing and the identification of what else we need to do to be better. There's also this note of avoiding anything that would be perceived as tone deaf, as we referenced earlier, but that they also are open to a balance of things that are both fun and celebratory with the things that are inclusive and thoughtful. So lastly, in the last two slides, there's just a couple of recommendations that came out from this study that think of it as a commemoration, think of it as an exploration of freedom, incorporate this sense that we're striving to achieve freedom and equality for all. And I think importantly, for our efforts, that we have to know history to do that. And that we can help be part of the process of making things better. And that we should approach it with a focus on an inclusive collection of stories. And here you see, just to wrap ourselves up, because the traditional cluster is all in, if we can grow this NEOTERIC cluster, we have an opportunity to achieve something that is balanced, but also inclusive and meaningful for the largest number of folks. So let me go ahead and stop sharing, if I can. There we go. And we've got about 10 minutes or so just to open the floor for any questions or comments about that very brief overview. 31 out of 300 slides. So there you go. All in 20 minutes approximately. So questions, comments, immediate reactions. I will tell you, I found the full presentation incredibly insightful, not just to our work in support of the commemoration, but also just to our work at Gunson Hall and what and how I am thinking about our work broadly in different communally and civically too. I think this transcends just history museums and culture. So thoughts, reactions, comments, questions?
This is Mary. I just think back to the 1976, and there's just two things I remember, and they were the bicentennial minutes, because I was a teacher, and so that was like a way to start the day with my students each day, that there was some type of historical fact or feature about our country. And as far as I know, they were nationwide broadcasts. And the other thing was the big fireworks in July 4th. So I don't have much to share about what I remember from the past, but as an educator, I just really want them to get the feeling of all perspectives, British, American, African American, everybody, as we discuss this celebration or commemoration.
No, that's a great point, Mary. Thank you.
This is Patrick. I thought, just to echo your thoughts, Scott, that's an extremely insightful presentation you just gave. And from a marketing perspective, it gives kind of like a fantastic cheat sheet on the correct messaging and the audiences that we will be talking to. So thank you for choosing those slides out of the greater number of slides, because that helped a bunch. But I think for me, the good news is, with the diverse nature of Fairfax County and the amount of stories that we have to tell that pertain to us, I think that we have the opportunity to absolutely appeal to the entire audience that the study identified as people who would potentially be interested in what we have to tell. So I think there's a lot of good news for us coming out of that study, because not only of our diverse population and wonderful stories to come out of that, but just also the good work that like you do, Mount Vernon does, Woodlawn does, and really reaching down into already telling a diverse amount of stories of what happened at your sites as well. So I think we're going to have a broad appeal to all audiences, and it's really about like crafting the messaging and encouraging those who are going to participate in this to come along with us and to kind of craft their programs and messaging just to kind of go along with what that report showed. So just thank you for sharing that today. It's really crystallized a lot of things in my mind.
No, I think those are great points, Patrick, and I think that your comment about the diverse collection of stories and sites in Fairfax County is particularly important and relevant, because we have a really distinctive and unique opportunity because of that, because that diversity allows us to offer something that appeals to both of those core audience demographics, but also those stories and sites are very aligned in the sense that there are things at all of those sites that would individually but collectively appeal to both of those demographics. So I think you make several really important points for us to bear in mind as well. Thank you. Other thoughts?
Scott, if I could just say something back to Mary. I had been looking at the American Battlefield site, and they're the umbrella organization for the commemoration. And I'm looking at it now, and of course I can't put my fingers on it, but I had seen that Jim Percoco, who you recall was the head of the applied history program at West Springfield, and then he retired a couple of years ago. He's doing these kind of small, almost like the bicentennial minutes on that platform. And so I think that's something we should keep in mind, is looking at some of these organizations and what they're planning, and then either, you know, tag on to it or adopt something specifically for Fairfax County. So let's try to keep that idea in mind as we plan out events. 'Cause I think that is something we could do, and something we did during the 275th with Channel 16.
That's a great point, a great suggestion, and I love that idea. We did something similar when I was in Florida around the 400th of Florida. And I think it's accessible, it's affordable, and it's impactful. So that's a great comment.
Well, and can't you almost hear it on like WTOP? You know how they have that not a sermon, just a thought. Just totally a sermon. It catches my eye, but as we slowly go back to work someday, or sitting in traffic, that might be a good forum for us to push some content out. So that's just something to think about.
Great.
The other thing, and me again as the history teacher, is that there's lots of people out there besides the DAR and the SAR who are looking for ancestors or whatever, and who may have contributed, you know, to the founding of our country. I don't have an answer to this. I'm working with a DAR right now who is trying to find information about an African American who served after the war, and he died in Alexandria, Gretchen, at 93, and they want to mark his grave. And we're having a hard time finding where he was buried. And, you know, just, we've got 5 years. If people start saying, well, hey, my ancestor, you know, fought and, you know, died wherever, and start collecting, maybe they didn't live in Fairfax County, but their relatives now live in Fairfax County and has value to them. Just a thought. It's kind of a way out there, maybe not a priority, but just something to encourage people to share their personal connection to the Declaration of Independence or the American Revolution.
No, thank you, Mary. Very good points. Other thoughts or comments about this study? And I will send it out to y'all.
I'd like to make it. For me, it was really not only was it insightful. Doesn't describe it for me. It was for me. I had several epiphanies in it because by background, you know, I'm not a historian. By background, I'm a high-tech sales and marketing person. But I've spent the last 5 or 6 years working as a volunteer, Fairfax NAACP, changing Confederate school names, and I'm now working on other things. And so this idea of, you know, of bringing these two together, kind of this, I never thought of it in terms of marketing before. I did in a way, but not as much as this kind of put these two ideas together for me, in that this analysis of the NEOTERIC versus the traditional. I mean, I've seen that right in my face. You know, and I know the flashpoints, if you want to call them that, which is kind of an understatement, that can occur around this idea of having to know your history, right? So the selection to try to bridge this gap between, if it's a gap, bridge this thing between the values that were described in this study of the traditional and the values of the NEOTERIC, and bring them together from a marketing point of view, to attract the biggest audience will be challenging, because there are really flashpoints between, as Mary said, some of the, especially in my experience in Virginia, some of the traditional historians and some of the new age historians and all that kind of stuff. So that I thought it was, for me, I thought it was a great pitch, and Scott, you did a good job, great job. Probably out of this 300-page thing, summarizing what was most important to what we're doing, and it was very educational for me too. So
good.
That epiphany of, you know, the flashpoint of knowing your history. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the expression, "You're just trying to rewrite history."
Sure.
By including these, you know. You've all heard that, right?
Well, I think you make several interesting points, and thank you, George. I think one of the things that we should be thoughtful about as we think about, not just what we're going to do over the next few months or what we propose to the board, but more importantly, over the next 5 years, is being aware of those flashpoints. I mean, we have experienced those. I'm sure we all have experienced those in different ways at different times. But I think part of the value I find in that study is it creates a framework for understanding perhaps what the motivations are behind those differences and where those flashpoints may exist. And then as a building out of that, it gives us an opportunity to be thoughtful about how we're going to, one, acknowledge and recognize, but also either accept or, challenge is perhaps not the right word, but build something that recognizes those realities and is prepared to deal with it. So thank you, George. Other thoughts? Well, I don't know if I will have time today to send you the whole report before close of business, so you won't have the homework assignment of reading it over the weekend and reporting back. But I will. I see the thumbs up from Gretchen. Good deal. So I will send it to you. And again, there's no requirement to go through it in any more or less detail. But I think if you have a chance just to dig through it and a little bit. A few more of the sides, I think you'll find a lot else in there of benefit and value. And certainly continue the conversation after today via email. So if you have other thoughts or other reactions that you want to share with the group or talk with me or anybody else about, let's keep that dialogue flowing, because I think it will be something that will be important for us to consider. So all that said, I do want to take just a few minutes and think about who else we would like to invite to join. I think as we have acknowledged, and as I think I know we all collectively recognize, we are interested in adding others to our group, particularly folks that will bring a greater diversity of perspective and backgrounds and experiences. I have had several, I think 2 recommendations of folks, but I do want to just have sort of an open discussion now if there are names of individuals or even organizations that we want to approach by way of recommending somebody from within their organization. And Denise, I will ask you to help me write it down if you don't mind, and then we can follow up, because I think it'll be important if we're going, well, not if, I think it's important for others we would like to join us to come on board before the next meeting, so we can begin to get them engaged. So George, I see your hand is up, sir.
Yeah, now I'll bet you that most of the people I'll suggest you already know, but one person I would suggest, but would be, and I'm sure some of you know, Ed Henderson. You know Ed Henderson, who's the head of the Senator Hill Foundation? My experience, Mary's nodding her head. You know Ed, he's probably camped out with you upon occasion, hasn't he, Mary, down there? But I think Ed is one of the, and again, my vision might be more limited than yours, but he's one of the leading experts in really local Fairfax County African-American history. And he's a historian in that he was a history teacher, and he does actually do research and all that in addition to just, everything else he does. Now, I've been trying to get him to help me with something else that I'm doing, and he's too busy to do it because he's working on his grandfather, Edwin E.B. Henderson, was a really significant player locally. He's working on a couple of things on that, but he might be more interested in this organization than he is in what I'm trying to get him to help me with.
Great.
So he would be one I would suggest. Any of you know Ed Henderson other than Mary? You must know, okay, yeah.
I will say we're still trying to get somebody from George Mason University. I'm working on that. One of the suggestions that I received from Christine in the supervisor's office was Ann Barnes. I think many of you probably know Ann Barnes. She lives down here locally. She's been an active supporter and volunteer at Gunston. So she is already on my list. I'm drawing a blank, Denise, on the other emailed suggestion. But other thoughts or names for consideration?
You know, somebody else from Mason, Scott, might be Spencer Crew. Like he served as I just looked up his bio, but he's a professor of history, but he was president of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center for 6 years. He's worked at the National Museum of American History. He's a Smithsonian for 20. And he's just done a lot of great work in terms of analyzing like the African American experience here. So that may be a winner for us if he would join us. I know we reached out to him specifically during the Civil War 150th, just for his expertise on the Underground Railroad, and he didn't join us at that time, but he came highly recommended as someone who could potentially help us with that. So that would be my 2 cents.
Spencer is fabulous, and he's a great suggestion, Patrick. I know him very well. Unfortunately, the Commonwealth beat us to it, and he is on the Commonwealth Commission. So I think it's we can certainly ask, but I think it's unlikely that he will accept both, just given the demands on his time. But as Gretchen knows, he's already providing a lot of great value to the Commonwealth Commission, and the governor beat us to the punch on that one. But a great suggestion.
And as long as he's involved, that's cool.
And I think we can go to him for specific tasks, Patrick, you know?
Yeah, if we have access to him and to seek his guidance on certain things, I think that in and of itself is a huge resource.
Yeah. Now, Scott, I have some questions for you. So do we want, I mean, you're talking about specific individuals, but what about categories of organizations that we should include? And then my second question is, before you stack the deck with this group, would it be better to set up a committee structure and then load different people on committees, right? So you have your steering committee, and then say we have, I'm making up a number, 6 committees, and then put people under those. I know that's entirely different, but I think on this committee, you need someone from FCPS, someone from the Arts Council, someone from the Park Authority. And I think you were supposed to have someone from the Park Service on this, weren't you? Or am I thinking of something else?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I think the only representative that the work group is missing from the original board matter was a representative from GMU.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Scott, have you worked with Lenitra Berger at all? Is she who's the one who's been doing the collaboration with your enslaved work?
We have worked with Lenitra, and we've worked with Wendy Manuel Scott. My communications with the university up to this point have been with the president's office, not so much with their faculty. And that's not in any way a reflection of a lack of respect or benefit in what the faculty would provide. But I was hoping to get someone in the president's office that would have more of an ability to speak on behalf of the university broadly and galvanize support within the university broadly than just perhaps the content expertise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's the better way to go. Yeah, more strategic.
I think to your other points, I think it makes sense. I do agree that it would also make sense to think about the subcommittees in a way that will also create opportunities to invite people to support the specific work of those committees with that specific expertise or those networks. I'm also just cognizant of the fact that there are probably other perspectives that will be helpful to our work in advance of submitting a report to. So I guess what I'm saying is I think we can do both. And I think you're saying the same thing. we need some other representation on the work group, but also the committees offer an opportunity to bring even more people into the
Yeah,
into
I think
the
it'll
conversation.
expand our reach, and maybe the goal should be for us to have a committee structure at least loosely in place before we turn in the June report, right?
I agree,
So
absolutely.
they see progress and a structure and a plan.
No, I agree. I think we'll definitely want to have a committee structure in place, and ideally, some representation, all those committees, so the board can see that this isn't just conceptual, but there's an actual work plan and a structure to the work plan that will guide things going forward. And obviously that ties into the budget request that we want to make at some point this year, later in the year as well. And I think that budget request will also be driven and a stronger request if there's a structure underpinning and defining what that work will be, and the committee provides that.
Scott, I'm working with many African-American county residents who are working on preserving cemeteries, et cetera, who have a wonderful Facebook page, and I'm trying to, maybe I'll get it wrong. It's one tree, many branches, I think is it. I can send the information to you. But it's Gloria Runyon and Edie Carter. These are from Vienna area, particularly. Lanille Taylor from the Prince William area. These are Fitzhugh Carter Harris African-American descendants, which those names go back to the FFBs of Virginia. I do not know if any of them would be interested in working on the committee. I know several of them are very busy with what they do, but if you want me to reach out through that Facebook page, or if somebody else knows the names I'm saying and they say, yes, we should recommend them. I just know that there's the cemetery contacts.
No, I think it would be great if you would, confirm that organization or send a link, and we all can sort of collectively check it out. And I should say, we don't need to have 100% decided who we might like to join us in this effort by the next meeting. I didn't mean to apply that when I commented earlier. What I would say, if there are others who we can identify now that we want to go ahead and invite, the sooner we can get them on board, working with us, helping us out, I think the better. But that doesn't mean we can't add folks going forward either.
And you can always ask Ed Henderson to recommend others.
Sure.
Or Spencer Crew to recommend others.
Absolutely. Are there any other? I see Kamala's raising her hand. Yes.
Thanks, Scott. And I'm sorry if I missed this name, but I popped out to ask Christine. She mentioned Ann Barnes with the History Commission.
I mentioned her earlier. Christine sent that recommendation to me via email, so she's already on the list.
Sorry.
Nope, good. We don't want to. She lives just like a mile up the road from me. So, are there any other names that we want to make sure we capture now?
I have a comment on a name, just to supplement what Mary said. When I was trying to get Ed Henderson to help me with what I want him to help me with, he said that he knew several people at George Mason that he would connect me with. So I'll get some names from him and see if they match.
Awesome.
You may already know them.
Well, I think the more names that we have of folks that are interested and can advise and support the work, the better. Because we got 5 years to pull this off, and there may be a point if they're not ready now, or there's not a role now, there may be 1-2 years from now. So I think the more the better.
Yeah, and another thing, Scott, so like a couple years ago, about a year and a half ago now, Chairman Bulova instituted like the beginning of like what eventually became like the One Fairfax policy that the county has kind of like embraced as a way to ensure, equity and appropriate representation from all the groups that are living here and visiting the county, and they have come up with like different kind of like strategy teams within that format. And I was just looking, and they have like a team assembled that looks at cultural and recreational opportunities and also like an education and lifelong learning opportunities. And they have like assigned county people as like a team champion of these groups. And you know, maybe that's a angle or an opportunity that we take to kind of like include like at least like a representation of like those couple of teams that seem like, because there's like housing and stuff like that, but the cultural opportunities and the educational opportunities seem like we could align with what it is that they're trying to do to ensure that like all these different and diverse stories are told through our initiative as well.
No, that's a great suggestion too. So we all can follow up and think more about that. I know the supervisor feels strongly that One Fairfax should be part of this effort in some way, which I think is great, or at least support and be aware of it. So that's certainly a good avenue that we can explore further.
Patrick just triggered something in my head that I had meant to mention, and that is, would we like to have in some role a set of students, and I don't mean college students necessarily, but a set of students?
I was going to suggest the same thing, George. We need a youth perspective. Even though Patrick, I always think he's 20, we probably need some youth perspective.
That's a great suggestion. I would welcome to have that perspective.
I have a lot of confidence. I've had a lot of luck with students, and they're always a good voice to have.
No, that's a wonderful suggestion. I really appreciate that. I think that's a great idea. Well, in the interest of time, if any other names occur to you, or if you, as several of you have volunteered to do, if in speaking with others, other recommendations come in, just forward them to Denise and I, if you would, and then you know, we'll convene and sort of see what the next steps will be. But I do appreciate the suggestions and your insight. And that said, the last primary thing on our agenda is just to talk for a few minutes about subcommittee structure. We learned a tremendous amount from Gretchen and Patrick last week, so it may be that there's a model from one of the prior county commemorations that we can fit seamlessly into what we're doing. But I do want to begin to identify and have some consensus around at least what the preliminary committees should be, so we can begin to think of others to support the work and divide up some responsibility. But I assure you, we will not go past 4 o'clock. That is selfish on my part because I have somewhere I need to get to, but also want to be sensitive to your time. So any initial thoughts about committee structure, or what should be the first couple of committees that we need? I know from, you know, we had some great notes and presentation last time. So thoughts?
Well, one should be the signature event. And then, you know, as a nod to George, one should be like the youth, whatever, you know, youth committee, that kind of thing. There's all kinds of good stuff that could go in there.
And also some type of, I want to call it county awareness. People who live in Springfield don't know anything about Reston or, you know, whatever. And somehow to get that broad look at what happened, you know, in history in this county, not just where you specifically live.
Other thoughts?
If the county is giving us funds, we need to have some kind of finance thing just to keep track of that and keep our eyes on that like a hawk. So at any given moment, we can report out what we've spent, what we need, like that kind of thing, a budget committee.
Agreed.
And then marketing and communications, that could dovetail into what Mary was just talking about.
Can I suggest to a coordinating committee that has this kind of like the central location where people are finding out what the entities across the county are planning to do. So it's kind of, which I think will help communications.
No, that's a good suggestion as well, Liz. Thank you. So that's 6 right there. Do we feel like that's a good start? I can share with you a wonderful quote from George Mason when he went to the 5th Virginia Convention and was assigned to one of many committees, in which he wrote a letter to Richard Henry Lee saying they're way too, I'm paraphrasing, way too many committees overcharged with useless members and nothing good will ever come of it. So I think we want to avoid too many, but we want to make sure we have enough and the right ones. Or else the ghost of George over here at Gunston will haunt me even more than he does on a regular basis. So do we feel like that's a pretty good start? Maybe flesh him out a little bit, which I'm happy to do, and provide sort of some, even a sentence or two about the purpose, or are there anything we think that's glaringly lacking at this point?
Well, if you take those and flesh it out, I think you'll be able to see what's missing, and, part of what we want to do, as far as exhibits and public programs and education and art shows, those kind of things need to fit somewhere. And that's just a small piece of what we want to do.
I heard large event planning, but is there a planning committee for the rest of it?
Can you
I
say
think
that
that's
again?
us.
Oh, okay.
I think our work group will continue to sort of be the strategic planning committee, for lack of a better term. And we'll have the distinct privilege of delegating responsibilities to all of these other committees. Well, why don't I take a stab at a sentence or two about these? The only other thought I had, which I'll just put forth, was, this may not be exactly what we want to call it, but, given what we're hoping to accomplish and achieve, would raise the question of whether there'd be value in having a particular committee focused on diversity and inclusion. I'm thinking there may be value in that. All right. So I will add, so at this point, just to recap, we've got signature event, youth, and these are my notes, so forgive me and correct me if I've not captured it correctly. Signature event, youth engagement, PR and communications, finance budget, coordinating, diversity and inclusion. Mary referenced the county awareness, which maybe that's a standalone Mary, or Mary, as I think Patrick alluded to, that rolls up under PR and communications. And then some sort of a programs or activities committee of some sort. Do we think that's a good start?
Yeah, the only thing else I'm thinking of, it was very useful for the 275th to have a separate history community committee, because that is your core constituency, right? All of these history, genealogy, and there's so many. There's more than 100. Maybe we add that later and tuck it under something else, but just wrangling all those groups and having them meet twice a year at this point, just to keep them in the loop, because they're all going to start slowly planning their own things.
No, that's a good thought too.
Not that there's not a ton of other groups, all the different, there's like a million groups in Fairfax County, right? There's a group for everything.
Okay. All right.
With that,
I'm giving talks to people I've never heard of. I'm talking to the daughters of American colonists and colonial dames in the near future. And they found me and I said, okay, they said, what do you speak about on the American Revolution? And I said, nothing. So I'm getting close to the American Revolution for them. But these organizations are thriving in our county, and I wasn't aware of them. So that's Gretchen's point is great. There are, groups out there with historical societies and everything that we need to touch in and say, hey, we're getting ready to launch planning for this, and we want you to be in on the ground floor.
No, I think that's a great example, Mary, of why a committee such as that would have some value and benefit. So unless there's anything else that people think is glaringly missing, I will take a stab at a sentence or two description and send it out to y'all, and we'll see if we need any refinement or if we're comfortable with the general approach. And I welcome your thoughts about whether there's points of intersection where perhaps some of these can be combined into one, or whether we think they should in fact all be separate and distinct. But there's some great thoughts. Good work. Any questions, or do we have any public comment, or any questions for the good of the cause while we're all together?
Scott, we need to vote to accept the minutes.
Oops, I always forget that, Denise.
Sorry.
I got to put that on the agenda. Do we have a motion to accept the minutes?
I motion to accept the minutes.
I will second.
All right, all in favor, just wave your hands. All right, very good. The minutes passed unanimously, without abstention or dissent, just the way we like it. Anything else? Well, look at that. I'm going to allow everybody an extra 10 minutes to hopefully get a little sunshine, go outside a little bit. Thank you. This has been a great meeting. All of our meetings, I think, have been really open, honest, really helpful, really beneficial, and just look forward to our next steps. Thank you all very much for your time and your energy and your insight, and have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.
See you next time.
Take care.
Thanks, Scott. Nice job.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure. Bye.